Good morning, it's Rabbi Yitzhak David Smith here, and it's good to see you all again, and let's try to get some clarity about what's going on. A lot of people are talking about moving to Israel, and look how dangerous the world is, and you have rabbis in Israel preaching that everyone should come to Israel, and you have people in America saying everyone should go to Israel. We have to ask ourselves the question, what does God Almighty want from each one of us? And we first have to start as we talk about the 6 steps of the proper decision-making process, the Torah decision-making process. The first is to know what Ruach Hashem is. What is the Spirit of God Almighty? And the Spirit of God Almighty is something that we get is beyond even the verses in the Torah. It's actually understanding that God Almighty is all capable, all loving, the Creator, omnipresent, omnipotent. Everything that God Almighty wants to do good, He created a safe world for us to flourish in. And when we start to understand, right there, we can see a contradiction to the way the world is being presented to us by the forces of disinformation, presenting the world to us as a hostile place. All the non-Jews are hostile, want to get the Jews, and this is a lie. This is actually the lie of Amalek. And it's a lie of Amalek to try to convince the Jews that they should act in fear and hide and withdraw their influence from the nations. And that's best represented by Jews fleeing from the places we were scattered to in order to uplift the world, by everyone going and coalescing into one place and abandoning the world. If we think about it, what is the source of the exile in the first place? The source of the exile is that the Jewish people were all living in the Holy Land, and our job there was to be a light into the nations and to be able to influence and uplift the entire world to know about God Almighty in an active way. King Solomon put in 10 extra menorahs, 10 extra candelabrum, 10 with each with 7 branches to represent the 70 nations. We're going to light up the nations. We're going to uplift the nations. And there was an entire process of bringing all the people that came to do business in the Holy Land, bringing them to the Holy Temple. The tribe of Zebulun did that to bring every human being to know that there's a God and a God Almighty that's creating every person lovingly in His divine image at every single moment. So what happened was we became self-centered. We started to pursue idolatry, pursue immorality, and started to pursue causeless hatred, which are all representing self-centeredness, because idolatry is fundamentally who could you serve today in order to get what you want. And immorality is what experience can be had today to get what you want. And that leads to hatred of everybody else, because everyone else is a threat to you getting what you want. So God Almighty says, I'm sorry, my children, but this is not working. You're not getting the point, and you become completely self-centered. Here, go out, and I'm scattering you among the nations to be completely scattered, where you have to start focusing on these other human beings that are around you, because you will see that their well-being is essential for your well-being. Their spiritual and physical well-being is part and parcel of your well-being, which is what we should have known when we were in the Holy Land, all together with the Holy Temple. So what happens is that we were scattered for this very purpose of uplifting all the nations. And this is something that really aggravates Amalek, because Amalek wants the Jews withdrawn from being scattered among the nations, because then the Jews can be concentrated in one place and have no influence on the nations, which means to say that Amalek will be the only influencer on the nations. Now you could tell me, oh, you're going to do Zoom podcasts from Eretz Yisrael, and you're going to influence the nations from there. But the practical reality is there's a very, very small number of Jews in the Holy Land that are busy influencing the non-Jews in the rest of the world. Plus, reality is that we see God Almighty scattered us because He wants us to have a personal interaction with the non-Jewish people around us. We are supposed to uplift them by speaking to them in person and guiding them and being the shepherds of faith to help the entire world connect to God Almighty. So now we can start to understand that God Almighty scattered everyone around the world. But what is something that we could see is that we could learn everything from not everything. We learn everything from the Torah, but we can start to understand the intention of the Marxists when we listen to them and take what they're saying seriously. So one of the big Marxist organizations is called Hezbollah. communist terror organization masquerading as Muslims, as religious fanatics, which they are just fanatical communists. And the head of that said that he wants all the Jews to move to Israel. Not a guy named Nasrallah, may his name be erased, but may he do tshuva and return to God Almighty first and foremost. But he says that he wants all the Jews to move to Israel so that they'll all be in one place for Hezbollah to be able to carry out its goals to be able to, God forbid, eradicate. Malik clearly states they want to eradicate all the Jews. So now you're going to say, one second, we have the Israeli army that's going to protect the people, but we see the Israeli army is not capable of protecting the Jewish people in the Holy Land. We see that there are other agendas by the leadership in the Israeli government and the army leadership that is not in line with doing the best to protect the security and the lives of the Jews and the non-Jews in the Holy Land. So we've made other videos that have described that, but suffice it to say that we can see from the constant state of defeat that the Israeli army finds itself in, that it is not accomplishing what it claims to accomplish. And matter of fact, the level of terror and distress for the Jewish people is only increasing under the governance of the State of Israel. So we actually see that the Lubavitch Rebbe said in the 1950s that the diaspora, the spreading around of the Jewish people around the world, is something that is of great actually security for the Jewish people, because we are not all in one place to be targeted and forced into groupthink and this national security tyranny that the Jewish people find themselves under, where they're basically their ability to control, to save their own lives, is controlled by the government. They are armed or disarmed at will of the government, and then they are not able to protect themselves, and they're subject to whatever the policies are of the government as to how the government's going to react and interact with the rest of the world. And including, we see that the Israeli government has been funding and building the terror groups that are now murdering thousands of Jews. So clearly that's not the answer and that's not the solution. But there's this mythology that if the Amalek is successful in promoting the idea that the world is a hostile place, and the rabbis could pick up that message and then drive that home to their congregations and basically drive the Jewish people into the land of Israel and offer the sweetness of the idea of all living together, and the army is going to protect the Jewish people, which is just a false ideology, because only God Almighty can protect us, then you could get all the Jewish people living in the land of Israel. But the incredible thing is that we see that one of the worst places to live during the time of the contraction and the spasm of tyranny of 2020 was in the state of Israel, where there was the greatest pursuit and war against synagogues, the war against yeshivas, the war against schooling, chinuch, dedicating children into the service of God Almighty, and then the compulsion that you had to follow government orders, and those should supersede your own personal decisions as to what's best for your own health, completely in contradiction to what God Almighty intends. And so what this move to compel all the Jewish peoples to drive them out of the diaspora into the land of Israel is doing is actually strengthening the hand of a tyranny that is a tyranny. Right now, it's a tyranny, looks a little bit more subdued because it's now making motions and claims that it's there to protect the people. But we see that this is the tyranny that actually funded the terror that is now fighting and subjects through its tyranny the soldiers to tremendously limiting the rules of engagement. And we could go on and on with this terrible, painful situation in great detail. But that's not the point right here. The point is right here. You and I need to see the world as it really is. It's a world waiting for the guidance of the children of Israel, the Jewish people. We need to step up to that role and know that we are in each place where we are right here, right now, for a purpose, to uplift the people around us. And we are not meant to be fulfilling our selfish desire to feel a greater sense of calm, belonging, and safety, and therefore abandoning everyone else to the upheaval and the chaos and the turmoil. We are supposed to be creating stability in each one of the countries that we're in, and to actively promote the knowledge of God Almighty with all the children, with all the people that live in the country, to demand that there should be no funding and support of any Marxism and any terrorism, because Amalek is coming to eradicate every human being, God forbid, and bring every human being to recognize that there's nothing besides God Almighty, that God Almighty loves every human being that he has created in God Almighty's divine image. That is the call of the hour. The more that we are told that the world is a dangerous place, the more we have to see through that lie and recognize that every human being is wondering in bewilderment. Where are the Jews with the message of hope for every human being? That's what we're here to do at RabbiSmith.org. That's what we're here to do at the Hope for Humanity YouTube channel. Subscribe, join us at RabbiSmith.org, and today, go out and speak to another human being about what God Almighty's will is and his loving desire to see each one of us uplifted, living in a state of our inherent inheritance of the state of tranquility of our own souls, and that will be reflected in the face of every human being. God Almighty should bless you all.